Hey y'all, Rob here with ATX Legal, and today we're talking about DWIs with that BAC, blood alcohol concentration level, up over 0.15. And if you got that blood test back and your BAC is over 0.15, stick around and find out what those extra penalties might be. Of course, none of this is legal advice. If you do need legal advice on your specific situation, you can text us or visit us at atx.legal. Now, first let's talk about what a BAC of 0.15 really means. Now, if you look at the literature, it says 6 drinks. That's a rough guideline. For someone who's much bigger, it might not take 6 drinks to get to 0.15. For someone who's small, and especially females who don't metabolize quite as quickly, it might only take 4 drinks or maybe even less for some people. So that's just a rough guideline. A lot of people think that BAC over 0.15 means you're stumbling and falling down drunk. And for some people, that is true. But you would be surprised. I've seen people who you wouldn't even think were intoxicated, and that blood alcohol concentration came back well over 0.15. So just know that everybody is different. You can't always tell just by looking, or you can't always know just by how you feel whether or not you're up over that 0.15. Now, how do the police tell if you're up over 0.15? Well, they're going to ask you to do a breathalyzer test where you blow, and if you don't consent to that, they can go get a search warrant and get a vial of your blood where they can test that alcohol to see if it's up over 0.15. It's usually a good idea to refuse the breathalyzer for a number of reasons, and sometimes the police don't have the resources available to actually get the blood sample. So if you do refuse the breathalyzer, they might not get any sample at all. Now, what prosecutors will usually do if there is a blood sample and they're waiting on the results, they'll leave that DWI unfiled, and then when those blood results come back, they'll either file it as a regular misdemeanor if it's under 0.15, or they'll file it as a Class A misdemeanor with enhanced penalties if that blood alcohol comes back over 0.15. But until that blood results come back, the DWI remains unfiled. With a Class A misdemeanor, the potential jail time bumps up from 6 months to a year. The potential fine goes from $2,000 to $4,000. But the real impact comes in the way that prosecutors handle the case. And the reason those enhanced penalties don't make too much of a difference is that you're rarely going to see a DWI where the max penalties are enforced. You don't see people go to jail for an entire year over a DWI usually. So those maximum penalties don't really matter. But when the case is bumped up to a Class A misdemeanor, the prosecutor is not going to offer certain concessions that they would have if you had been only charged as a Class B. For example, they might not offer DWI court, or they might require an ignition interlock for your probation, where they wouldn't have asked for that on a Class B misdemeanor. Now, there are a number of ways to challenge a DWI with BAC over 0.15. And first, you have all the normal defenses you would have on a regular DWI. So if you can get all the evidence suppressed because the stop was bad and the officer didn't have probable cause to pull you over, the blood results would be suppressed along with that. Next, there are ways to challenge the procedure. Did the phlebotomist do the blood draw correctly? Did the police administer the breathalyzer correctly? Did they take all the steps that they're supposed to? There's a long laundry list of things that the phlebotomist has to do, maintain the integrity of the sample. And if they don't do that, there's a good possibility that the judge is going to throw out that sample, so the prosecutor would have to proceed without it. Another way to challenge that blood test is to show that even though the BAC was over 0.15 at the time of the test, it wasn't necessarily that when they were driving. They have to show that the BAC was over 0.15 when they were driving the car. And the thing about BAC is it's always either rising or falling. I had one case where a client had a lot to drink, but he had it to drink right before he drove. He looked normal in the video. He performed very well on the field sobriety tests, but that BAC came back over 0.15. And what he told the police on scene, and he was very consistent, and what he told me was that he had just drank that alcohol right before he had driven. So I was able to successfully make the case that the BAC was likely lower at the time he was driving. And of course, if that BAC was barely over 0.15, it's a lot easier to make that case than if it's like 0.2, 0.25 or something like that. At the end of the day, the BAC test is just one factor in the totality of the circumstances. It's one thing to be considered. And when I'm dealing with the prosecutor, if the BAC is high, I'm pointing out all the other factors that might support my client. And if the BAC is on the lower end of the spectrum, I'm making sure to hammer that point to the prosecutor as well. Each case is unique and different, and that's why it's a good idea to have an attorney on your side who has handled these kind of cases. So if you do want a consultation on your case, like we said before, just give us a text message or visit us at the contact form listed below.